It would be great if they did have a career path in mind. Often what I find is, particularly for parents who aren't also game players, is they have a very simple goal. They want to turn their game consuming child into someone who actually contributes to the game community. It's this usual sort of, my kid loves playing, how can I turn that into a job? My usual response is, well, there are a lot of different jobs. I think you need to start to figure out what they're good at, what they're excited about, what they want to do. And it's also important to recognize that those roles change. So I have students who started in localization and they were literally translating Nintendo games into Japanese, and they move into game design, or people who start in sound design and move into game development. Having that, I think, particularly in this generation, having that flexibility affords you longevity in the industry.
My name is Dr. Marc Williams. Welcome to my masterclass. I have a PhD in education from West Virginia University. I have a master's in sport management and an MBA from the University of Massachusetts. I even have an undergraduate degree in sociology from William Patterson University. And currently, I'm the Global Scholar Practitioner at HBCU, Florida Memorial University. But I also work for 3 of the largest sports brands in the world, Reebok, Champ Sports, and Foot Action. But I can't go anywhere without my Jordan 1s. Join me and my guests as we explore their rise to the top through adversity and challenges. It's time to help you find a hero in you. Welcome to my masterclass. Welcome again to another episode of Dr. Marc's Masterclass Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Marc Williams, and I'm also partnered here, and this is powered by Innovation Media Enterprises with my 2 good friends, Aaron and Sia, that hold it down there. Producers extraordinaire. Thank you so much for all that you do. Also to my man, AJ, on the wheels of steel. Yes, holding it down for us, making us sound so good here. And we got to give a shout out to our wonderful, the RZA. Those of you who follow Wu-Tang Clan and music, that's the head, okay? Jacob Miles, he's our fearless leader that started this amazing opportunity and this amazing platform here as the #1 esports podcast network in the world. And people are like, well, Marc, is that a possibility? Is that really the case? I'm claiming it because no one else is claiming it. So I'm claiming it and I'm saying it, and that's it. So today is a very special day. As you know, I would say this is Education Day. As you see, I'm sporting my West Virginia University gear. This is where I went and got my PhD, my friends. So I'm representing it. I'm not just wearing it just to wear it, but I'm wearing it because I want to say thank you to West Virginia University for providing me 4 great years of education. And many of you know I have my doctorate in education, but my doctorate is focusing on curriculum. So what do? I help universities write curriculum. Yes. Did I plan on doing that? No, I did not. It's in curriculum and it's also in leadership. So I had no idea that my background in music, sports, fashion, film, education, video games was going to pay off like this in education. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be at Florida Memorial University, an HBCU in South Florida, and proud to be their first Global Scholar Practitioner. And I'm starting an esports program that is focused and fueled around the STEM area. It's the great thing is that I have a person that is dynamic, another dynamic educator that is going to speak to us today. And actually, he's a neighbor of mine, not my physical neighbor, but he's in Coral Gables, and some people might say Miami. He's at the University of Miami because that's where Coral Gables is. But there are some people that still say they're in Miami. At the end of the day, he's my South Florida brother that I am my brother from another mother. And interestingly enough, he came from another school called Miami University in Ohio. And I want to introduce you to him because I think that when we're talking about this $200 billion industry called the video game industry, esports represents about 6 to 7%. That's a sliver. And right now, the sexy word, the sexy term in education and just in our society is esports. So everyone wants to start an esports program. There's over 3,000 schools out there that have esports in terms of games at their school, but there's only 500 schools in the country that actually have varsity esports where people are getting athletic scholarships to play. But we also know that you don't go to school to play video games. You go to school to get an education. Okay. And that's where this gentleman comes in at, because there's about 80 to 81 schools right now that actually offer some form of academic curriculum or major or concentration of esports and video games. And we're going to talk about that. And this next person that I'm going to bring and introduce to you is someone who is in the video game world. He is very well known, but in academia and some areas in academia and even pop culture, unheralded. There's so many unheralded professors and administrators and dynamic people out there that you and your children may not know of, but you need to know, especially if you're thinking about going to college or if you're in high school and you're in middle school. You need to start thinking about your future. If your son or daughter is interested in careers in video games, and video games, it encompasses so many different layers. It's not just shooter games and sports games and fighter games. There's so many nuances. There's AR, there's VR, there's game design, there's marketing, there's entrepreneurship. I mean, there's so many different entities in it. But this person, his name is Lindsay Grace. I can't make that up. That's his name, Lindsay Grace. Yes, it sounds like a Hollywood name. It sounds like a TV show, maybe. Not Will and Grace, but Lindsay Grace is his name. And he has this profound name. And when you see his screen, you're going to see the green screen behind him. He's going to be like, Lindsay Grace, look at him. Yes, that's a professor. Yes, it's a professor. And he is dynamic. And why is he so dynamic? Lindsay, he's the Knight Chair of Interactive Media and an associate professor at University of Miami School of Communication. He's a vice president for the Higher Education Video Game Alliance. And in 2019, he was a recipient of the Games for Change Vanguard Award. He has a book called Do Things with Game, Social Media Impact Through Design, and his well-received guide to game design. His work has received numerous awards and recognition from the games and video game industry, and for the Games for Change Festival, the Digital Diversity Network, the Association of Computing Machinery's Digital Arts Community, Black Enterprise, and many others. He co-authored more than 50 papers, articles, and book chapters on games since 2009. So that's over 12 years he's been writing about it and being producing so many different entities around the video game industry. His creative work has been seen in selective showcases internationally, including New York, Paris, Singapore, Chicago, Vancouver, Istanbul, and others. Lindsay curated or co-curated Blank Arcade, Smithsonian American Arts Museum, Sam Arcade, and the Games of Change, Civic and Social Impact, and others, which means he's the real deal. Okay, all of that to say, this man is the real deal. I am honored and privileged to call this man friend. He and I have not met in person yet, even though he's about 10 minutes down the road from me. Actually, not 10 minutes, maybe 30 minutes down the road from me. And he was introduced to me by one of our dear friends that we just interviewed. Many of you will hear that interview with some of my dear friends at the University of Miami University in Ohio, Dr. Phil Alexander and Dr. Glenn Platt. As you know, two of the leading educators in the world. They introduced me to this brother, and I'm honored and proud to call him friend and also future colleague. And so I just want to welcome you to the show, Lindsay. How you feeling, man?
I'm feeling great. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So what do you think of that introduction? You're like, oh, that's a lot.
That was great.
Yes. So tell us about your position at the University of Miami, because a lot of times you hear titles and sometimes people get lost in titles and words. Tell us about what you do on a daily basis.
Sure. So my role as the Knight Chair in Interactive Media is largely to find disparate spaces that could be improved through largely game design. So that might be looking at journalism and trying to improve how people understand the world around them through games. It might be applying what we call social impact games or persuasive play games. These are games designed to change people's interest, activities, or opinions. It really varies. Largely, my responsibility is to try and see what's wrong with the world and see if games can help fix it. Okay. So tell us about your appetite for video games, because you went to Northwestern University. You got the MFA at University of Chicago. You got the BA in English from Northwestern. So there's a level of I guess like Dr. Phil, he's really big on writing. So did you think that you were going to go the writing route when you were an undergrad? And how did you wind up morphing into getting into the video game industry? I know you have a master's in computer science and electronic visualization from University of Chicago, but is that where it all began? That's a great question. And often when I talk to particularly new students, this question arises. The truth is, I started making games when I was about 10 years old. It was sort of a hobby. I was reading magazines, transcribing code, and I was really excited about making games, partly because I couldn't afford buying them, but I could, I had plenty of time. So I had plenty of time to make them. So I started there and then took kind of a hiatus. until after my undergrad. And most of my career to this point has been fairly circuitous. I think sometimes, particularly as people are trying to figure out where they're going to go in life, they think there's a clear and direct path. And I meet a lot of people in game design who have that same experience. It's not a clear and direct path. It's about seeing opportunity and also about responding to the world as it changes. So I worked as a mutual fund database administrator at one point. I worked at an industrial supply company. I worked at a variety of jobs that seemingly had nothing to do with games. But ultimately, each piece of that experience helped me become the kind of game designer I am now, where I'm combining my experience as, say, a software architect with the experience of getting an undergraduate in English and really understanding narrative and analysis. So ultimately, I wish I could tell you it was clear that there's a point in my life where I said, aha, this is when I really started to become a game designer. But ultimately, it's a product of a bunch of kind of responses to environment. My first faculty position was actually in interactive media and web design. And when I explained all the things that I was doing in games, they'd asked me to teach a course in narrative. And after that, I kind of ran with it, developed more of my understanding of the practice, and then started designing my own games.
Okay, this is pretty funny because you just kind of like skimmed over this. Like, yeah, I started designing games and reading magazines at 10. Okay, how did that happen? I mean, what did your parents do for a living? How did they encourage you? Just 10-year-olds just don't go around making games. So tell us about your background. Where did you grow up at? And how did your parents? Obviously they encourage you to be the best version of yourself, but what was it like growing up? What were your parents like, and where did you grow up at?
So it's really kind of a crazy story in itself. So my parents were very young. They had me at 18. They actually ended up going to college by the time they started going to college around my 6 years old or so. So my parents were kind of busy trying to hold down a job and go to college. And I had a lot of time. I'm an only child, so I had a lot of time and energy. At that same time, I developed a disease that had me in the hospital a lot. And so while I was in the hospital, I got exposed to video games. They had a little section. It was literally like 3 arcade games. And they literally we were allowed as patients that if we took our blood draws, if we behaved well, we could go play. And so I played and my mind was blown. I was absolutely hooked. And then I saw movies like War Games in the 80s and thought, oh my gosh, computers are the future. I want to make these things. I was also really excited about robotics. I think I was just an excitable kid.
What game was it the 3 games that you saw?
I always forget the title, but the short version is it was a racing sim, a car racing sim, early 80s, probably about 1982. And it was really just a maze game where you had to compete and take the right turn at the right time. But the idea of interacting with a computer just so excited me that when I went back to middle school, or not middle school, I think it was about second grade at this point. The short version is I got very, very lucky. And I always emphasize to anyone who sort of had some opportunities and really taken the opportunities. Part of it is about getting access to those opportunities. Basically, IBM had donated computers to my school in a poor community. And that school had a computer lab. And so we got to play a game called Load Runner. Absolutely excited me after I'd played some stuff in the hospital. And I wanted more and more and more. And I mentioned that IBM did it because if I fast forward more than 15 years later, as a professor at Miami of Ohio, I became the Armstrong Professor of Media Arts. And that Armstrong is named after the former CEO of IBM, who actually endowed funds at Miami of Ohio to do this kind of research. And one of his points of pride was providing Boston area schools like mine with computers free of charge in order to enhance their education. So it's I love that story as a way of illustrating how it comes full circle. So 20 years later, he's got a faculty member that he helped sort of develop into the person they are today by simply donating computers to a sort of at-risk community.
Wow. So let's tell people a little bit about when people talk about game design, people think that you're just designing games. There's different types. There's lead designers, level designers, content designers, game writers, system designers, technical designers. Can you kind of, if you were talking to a parent right now and
Sure.
their child is interested in something similar to you as far as designing a game. Now that when you were growing up, you didn't have kind of a guide about how that's going to happen. But now that you're someone who has a background in it and someone who teaches this, what would you be telling parents and young people in terms of the kind of career opportunities they can maybe enjoy or look forward to when it comes to game design?
If anyone ever talks to me about sort of what they want to do in games, the first thing I tell them to do is have an open mind. I couldn't have told someone a decade ago, you know what you should do is become an esports caster because you've got the personality for it. What I always emphasize is that you've got to be responsive. And that's why I describe the best kinds of games educations as not ones that give you an extremely narrow set of experiences that'll make you the perfect Maya animator or make you the perfect level designer, but instead the ones that give you a broad education that let you seize opportunity, so that you have enough understanding that when you see an opportunity, you can say, you know what, I think I could learn a little more Premiere and become the editor on a video game show, or I think I'm going to become a Twitch streamer, or I think I'm going to run a collection of Twitch streamers. All of those things, the people who lead these spaces are often just really good at reading the environment and then responding to it appropriately.
What do you, when you meet parents now and kids now, what are some of the career paths that they're interested in, or do they even have a career path in mind?
It would be great if they did have a career path in mind. Often what I find is, particularly for parents who aren't also game players, is they have a very simple goal. They want to turn their game consuming child into someone who actually contributes to the game community. It's this usual sort of, my kid loves playing, how can I turn that into a job? And my usual response is, well, there are a lot of different jobs. I think you need to start to figure out what they're good at, what they're excited about, what they want to do. And it's also important to recognize that those roles change. So I have students who started in localization and they were literally translating Nintendo games into Japanese, and they move into game design, or people who start in sound design and move into game development. Having that, I think, particularly in this generation, having that flexibility affords you longevity in the industry.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about the program at University of Miami. If a student is coming to your school and a parent is learning about your program, what is the nucleus of your program, and what are some of the things that what do you think of the things that you hang your hat on in terms of things that you do very well in your program?
Yeah, so I actually think we do so for example, we have our BA, and our BA does a really good job of giving people a broad range understanding of the world of games and the larger world of interactive media. So we have students who go on to do UX design, user experience design, as well as interface. And that's a good example of how being flexible works well. So a little bit like Hollywood, some people say they want to be a part of Hollywood and everyone first thinks, oh, I want to be on stage. But people who have long-term careers in Hollywood sometimes recognize that actually I want to be the audio producer. I want to be the executive producer. And what we do is prep students in that way, so they understand the wide range of jobs, because there are millions of people trying to be the next star, and there may only be 20 people trying to be the next executive producer on a great video game broadcast, for example. And so I think that's one of our strengths. And the other strength is an engagement with community. We do a lot of these, what we call sort of social impact projects, or games for good, interactive media for good. And I think that's one of the other things that distinguishes us from the average program.
One of the things that is always not a concern, but I'm curious about a lot. And we had this conversation with Phil over at in Miami of Ohio, is the D&I. You, someone being of color that is in this space and educating the world about what you're doing. What are some of the ways that we can really create pathways for students in color and ethnic minorities and women in this space that is not largely dominated by people of color?
Sure. So I've actually had a history of doing this a couple of different ways. So for years, about 3 years, I helped run an event that was largely focused on increasing diversity and inclusion in DC. We basically ran a conference for about 100 people and just talked about what we can do as an industry in order to improve that. And we engaged a variety of people that are sort of high profile in the space. The other is that I think, especially in game design and game development, one of the key markers of success is your portfolio, how much you've done. And while I don't know that I would always argue that the games industry is a meritocracy, I don't think it's always just how well you do. I do think there's some notion of who you know. I do think it's important to provide people those opportunities, which is why, for example, I've spent so many years working with the Global Game Jam and running game jams, because they're low cost, low barrier to entry opportunities to get experience making games. And the third one is actually about visibility. So as an example, and not to sort of mention my own projects, but as an example, the Black Game Makers book that I'm working on right now, where I've got a call out to all people who are the African diaspora to articulate the games they've made, their experiences, to talk about any research they've done. And then I collect that, and thanks to ETC Press out of Carnegie Mellon, we're going to publish an open access version of this book as well as a traditional print version that I think should function as a resource both for educators who are trying to say, well, I'd like to include more Black games in my curriculum, but also for those who are hoping to become game designers, developers, participate in esports in the future, by giving them a kind of roadmap and set of examples of other people of diverse backgrounds doing this kind of work.
From what you've seen in your experience, what out of all the, I guess, different areas of video games, where do you see the biggest upside for not only people of color, but just in general, in terms of the job opportunities out there? What do you see as far as the future for video games? Where do you think that area lies, and what are some of the jobs that may develop or that's not even developed yet? What areas do you think are the most prominent?
So I think a couple are really quite obvious. And about 10 years ago, I was a huge proponent of independent games, and you can see it in the resources that I'm collecting for the book that a number of people have said, I couldn't find a space for myself for the kinds of games I wanted to make, so I made my own. The fact that game production has reduced in cost and the barriers to entry are relatively low in comparison to 15, 20 years ago when you really only had consoles or PC downloads. I think that's one of the opportunities that's going to persist for the next 10 years. I think if you can make something great, then if it has the right momentum behind it, it can make your career. I also think that there's a lot of burgeoning opportunity in spaces like esports broadcasting. I think that not everyone can be an esports athlete, and a lot of the first round initiatives have focused on the actual athletes. And I think the challenge there is that there's so much more accoutrement, so much more stuff around an esports broadcast and general game spectating that needs to be fleshed out, that needs much more substantial labor forces behind it. And so I think that's the next, I think the low hanging fruit for someone who says, I want to be involved in games, but I don't know how.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I noticed too that you the vice president for Higher Education Video Game Alliance. What exactly is that, and what does it do? How does that function in education?
Sure. So I describe the HEVGA, or the Higher Education Video Games Alliance, as essentially an advocacy group aiming to improve the quality of education worldwide in games. And so it's everything from running scholarship programs and supporting the Electronic Software Association and other organizations that are trying to help people gain access to a better education in games, but also to help teachers, instructors at all levels, including post-secondary, so college and graduate level, figure out how to do their job better and find the resources, connect them with the individuals that really support the quality education that we think games deserves.
And I noticed you were on the board for the Digital Games Research Association. How many how many associations are out there around this? Not only in education, but because I would have, if I had not really taken a step to look at the video game industry outside of just playing the game and looking at it from an academic perspective and a research perspective, I'm just blown away every day by learning about so many researchers that are out there that are writing about video games, that are talking about misogyny in games, that are talking about advocacy in games. I mean, the list goes on and on. What are some of the organizations out there that you look at, that you respect, that you think is doing good work around this, and also to educate our audience about if the parents out there or students out there and they want to learn more about this industry and research and people and places and things that are out there. What are some of the resources out there that they can look at outside of the academic community?
Sure. So absolutely, I think one of the best ways to describe what you're seeing is been this trajectory change. I'd say it started about 15 years ago, where there weren't a lot of games education that was delivering something other than preparation for industry. And that has shifted. So now we have a space generally known as game studies, where people are analyzing games, looking at their social value, looking at their cultural value, looking at the things that they offer to communities. And for that kind of work, I absolutely love, in the educational and research space, the Digital Games Research Association, DIGRA. I think that there are older organizations like the IGDA, the International Game Developers Association, which has been going on strong for a long time, that do a really good job of connecting future game designers and developers with the current industry and supporting the current industry by looking at opportunities to make the experience of being in games more enjoyable. And they have a great sense of community. They have local IGDA chapters. So I often encourage people who are interested in engaging in the discipline or engaging in the games industry to try and see what they can do with their IGDA local chapter. Beyond that, there are so many great resources now that I'm almost struggling not to give you this litany. But off the top of my head, Informa, who runs the Game Developers Conference, the GDC, manages a variety of websites like Gama Sutra and Game Career Guide that have been resources for almost 20 years at this point, as well as attending the variety of conferences. And sometimes people are surprised to realize how close some of those conferences are. So on the East Coast, you have things like the East Coast Games Conference, which I find to be a very accessible sort of GDC light, a small model of the larger GDC, which is 25,000 people and can be overwhelming if you don't know where to go. But even within GDC, they make subsets. So there's a Friday for people who are interested in getting in that's part of the game, I think it's called a Game Career Seminar. And it's really just about helping people get an introduction to the world of games. So there's a lot of resources right now. And I think that's for the best, especially when you consider the opportunities that it provides for increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion.
What would you say to a parent or even a young person that really wants to get a leg up before they go to college, or even if they're in middle school and high school? What kind of resources should they look for? And when they're looking at learning about schools, first of all, about that have game design or video games in general, but also the conferences that they can go to that is accessible and it's easy to navigate through, so that they can have a better perspective and a leg up.
Sure. So the first thing I would recommend is actually just getting yourself oriented by checking all the online resources. So for example, the GDC offers something called the GDC Vault, and they put a number of these videos on YouTube. So if you want to get a sense for the intensity of the kinds of lectures that occur at GDC, it's a great, easy access resource. Likewise, you'll find that a number of faculty, including myself, maintain YouTube channels that articulate some of the core things that we either teach in class or that articulate our research, and all of that content is free and highly accessible. Likewise, I think it's important to engage with individual members and to find your way. So when I say individual members, I mean people who are part of the IGDA's local chapter or who are offering education within your community. HEBGA calculates more than 500 colleges and universities that are delivering this type of education. And I'm sure that there are a number of schools at the sort of K through 12 section that have also been doing this kind of work, and connecting with them through things like camps and online tutorials really do help you get a sense for how it is to do this kind of work. Now, I'm a game designer with a sort of development background, so I often recommend that people just go out and make something. So Game Salad's a great resource, Game Maker. These are really simple tools, Scratch, Twine, that will let you experience a subset of the game making experience. I think would really be useful to people. I also think it's important to recognize that for people who are, say, interested in esports, that again, there are ways for you to flirt with the real world experience by recording at home on your computer or looking up tutorials or just trying to engage with the material. I mean, I think it kind of comes back to the way that I came into this industry, which is literally by teaching myself. I would have loved the shortcut of someone else teaching me because it would have gotten me further faster. But I think that there's something to be said and something that's well respected in the industry when someone takes the initiative and engages on their own.
So right now, as a person of color, what would you recommend to a person of color or young Black male, young Black female that is interested in the video game industry? What would you recommend as far as schools, universities? Obviously, you know, your school, you would recommend your school, obviously. But what other schools would you recommend in terms of, because there's different nuances. There's every school has a different, I guess the way that they go about communicating to their students. Some schools have a full-blown esports program. Some schools have a game design program. Some schools are known for AR, VR. How would you direct a family, especially a person of color, if they said, "Hey, I'm interested in this"? What types of schools would you recommend to them? Because obviously there's many of them out there, including HBCUs. There are now a few HBCUs that are now offering it. But what are some of the schools that you look at and you say, "Hey, those are some of the leaders in this area"?
Sure. So unfortunately, unlike game design and game development programs that are ranked annually by the Princeton Review, and you could use the shorthand looking at the top 20, although the ranks can be misleading as there are some really great schools that aren't on those ranks and some schools that just game the system. I think that one of the most important things, and I would tell this across any interest in any college institution, is to get a sense for the character. And that character can actually shift generally within about a 5-year increment. So, for example, some schools are really interested in large volumes of students. And if you're the kind of student who needs a lot of individual care and attention, I'd strongly suggest that you avoid that kind of institution. Some of the bigger programs have this character. Others are really already firmly in the esports environment, not just you giving it sort of lip service. So, for example, University of Utah's got a strong esports team. They've got some faculty that I'm friends with who do some really good work in esports, both on the research side and on the industry side. So, I think that that's a strong example of an institution that I think covers all of it. But it's also a bigger program with 200 plus undergrads. So, if you want to be in a program with 20 undergrads, there are a variety of small liberal arts colleges, say in the Northeast, that have that opportunity and do have some engagement with esports. There's always a plus and minus. Ultimately, there are also finances. And then for people who really do need a diverse environment, there are some advantages and disadvantages to specific locations. So some of the more urban campuses tend to attract a wider variety of students from all over the world. And then some of the others are a little more homogenous, but you also have to understand your tolerance for that. An homogenous institution doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a very uncomfortable situation. But if you're looking for support groups and want to be amongst people who look like you, share the same culture as you, then you really should be looking at that as well. And it's always a balance, right? So in some cases, this is a strong argument for going to an HBCU and having that community. And in other cases, it may be that you're more concerned about making sure that you break in as an undergrad into the esports world, and you want to be at an institution that already has 3 major teams and scholarships in esports. Mm-hmm. So it really is a very personal decision. But I think I would start by looking very carefully beyond the marketing for any institution and look at the character that the individual students can share with you, that meeting with faculty can offer.
So, and as we talked, you and I, I've talked to your chair, Dr. Kim, and we talk about collaboration. How important is collaboration in academics right now when it comes to the video game industry?
Certainly. So collaboration amongst academics is essential. That's really how we get most of our work done. On the other side, the relationship with industry is always fluctuating. So there are faculty, researchers, who have done a really good job engaging in industry. But one of the challenges is that industry is often concerned about preserving its intellectual property. And so to let a faculty member in, particularly those faculty members who are very much interested in exposing the intellectual property or explaining how an organization works for the general good of the populace, it sometimes can be antithetical. It can work contrary to an industry institution's own goals. So if you make profit from having a secret sauce, the last thing you want to do is invite a highly published researcher in to learn about your secret sauce, because we are going to share it because we want everyone to prosper.
Wow, that's funny. I'm thinking too, if you had a crystal ball and you were to predict where we're going with esports, because people keep talking about this buzzword esports, and I keep telling people it's only 6%, 7% of the video game industry. Where do you see in academia? What do you see as the biggest, opportunity, or do you see the future in video games in terms of academia? What do you think the biggest upside is from what you see from your lens?
Sure. So, I've been teaching an esports class for the last 2 years. I created it when I arrived here at the University of Miami. And one of the trends I see that I think a lot of people have become savvy to is that for institutions that don't have the kinds of finances to, say, have a University of Miami level football team, or I used to work at an American University level basketball team, what happens is that esports is a cheaper opportunity to get national recognition in a digital space. So it says for some institutions, we are tech savvy, we have status, we have success, and we're part of the future. We're future forward. And so I think that one of the things you're going to see is a proliferation of some version of esports teams across institutions. I think it's also because the students want it. And having been one of the sort of early generation game design faculty, I started teaching game design back in 2003. One of the other things that we saw was the reason there were so many game design programs created between 2003 and 2009 was because people wanted it. Students came to school and said, I need this. I don't know why we're not learning this. And deans respond, provosts respond, presidents respond. So I think that proliferation is also going to be a product of how many students come to these institutions and say, why don't we have an esports team? To which an appropriate college goes, you're right, we should. So I think those are the two near field trends that I would expect.
Okay. Yeah, I want to remind everyone, if you're just listening to this podcast and watching this podcast wherever you are, you're listening to Dr. Marc's Masterclass Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Marc Williams, powered by Innovation Media Enterprises with Aaron and Sia, my partners here in crime. Thank you so much for all your support. And also AJ, our great engineer on the Wheels of Steel, is always making us sound so good. And we're listening to Lindsay Grace, who's the night chair in interactive media at the University of Miami, having this really fascinating conversation about esports, talking about game design, talking about video games, talking about academia, talking about parents and young people finding creative sources to communicate and learn about the ecosystem. And it's just been a fascinating conversation. We're going to definitely have to have you come back on, because you and I are talking about collaboration, coming together, trying to find things that work for both brands, both universities, but also really creating a pathway for students really to have a more diverse and more robust education around this space. How excited are you about, because I'm not sure if you've worked with HBCUs before, but how excited are you about educating our students about the things that you've done in your career? Because our students, it doesn't matter if they're white or black. We think people in general need to be exposed to a Lindsay Grace, because you are definitely one of the premier educators in the world when it comes to this. So how excited are you about being exposed and being able to educate some of our students at HBCUs?
Absolutely. I mean, my whole goal, my whole thing, if you will, is I'm just trying to help everybody get where they want to go. So if I can help you get there, let me do it.
Mm-hmm. We love that. We love that. So tell us about what are some of the things that you're excited about at the University of Miami in terms of things that we don't know yet, but something that you can share with us that's coming up the pike that you can educate us about, or even use as a recruiting tool to get more young people to think about applying to your university.
Certainly. I think a couple of things come to mind immediately. One is almost old news at this point, but we were are the first academic partner wow, let me try that again. So we are the first academic partner with Magic Leap. And so our relationship in the space of mixed reality is probably unparalleled, distinctly on the East Coast. We have a lot of projects that branch everything from medical science to fundamentals of art and a variety of other spaces that I think are really exciting. It's the kind of institution where you're going to say, oh, wait, so that first one happened there. And it's just going to keep happening. I think that's one of the points of pride for the institution. I also think that this particular area, so I think one of the things I'm excited about is being in South Florida, there's a clear sense of a new trajectory, a kind of rebirth. A lot of people have told me, I just moved down here about 2 or 3 years ago, that I'm coming at just the right time. And you can see the national conversation around moving more tech here, moving more finance down here. So it kind of feels like landing in San Francisco right at the right time. And there's this potential for this really, really exciting gold rush of new ideas, of new research, of new practices, of birthing new areas. We've got esports companies that come down here and say, oh no, we need to be based in Fort Lauderdale. We need to be based in Miami. And I think those are all really good signs. It feels like a good time to be here.
And I just got here in July, so are you telling me that I came at the great time too? So am I?
Yes.
Oh, good. That's good to hear. So Florida Memorial, I'm not going anywhere. You heard it first here from Lindsay Grace. This is a great time, and I truly believe that. I tell people all the time. We film and record my show out of Dallas. And Dallas and Frisco is like the Silicon Valley right now of this whole esports. And then you have LA, obviously. You have Atlanta. You have cities like Orlando, Raleigh, but bigger, larger cities like Houston, even Tampa they're not there yet. And even though we're in Miami, the ecosystem is starting to bubble up. You can feel it. And that one of the reasons why I came to Miami, I tell people all the time, I said, to be able to be in an environment where you see, you can kind of foreshadow what's about to happen. Similar to what you talked about in San Francisco with Silicon Valley. Most of those tech companies at the time, they may have saw it, they may not have saw it, but the ones that did see it, they were visionaries. They saw it. And if you've been in this space and immersed in this space for a while, you kind of look at where the trends are. And I really think, no pun intended to Will Smith's Miami song, but I think that when it comes to this space of it, you already have the entertainment here, you have the sports here. This Miami is the next big city. I think if it positions itself correctly, which I think we are, and we look at the education institutions that are down here, and we start collaborating in that space, and the tech companies are slowly but surely moving down there, I think Miami is going to be the next big city that's going to explode. And I feel it. That's why I'm here, and I'm happy and honored to have met you virtually again and again. But we have got to get together soon, my man, because we're not that far apart from each other.
Right. I agree.
Yes, and I think that's going to happen very soon because Kim and I had a very, very interesting conversation the other day. He's very excited about the potential partnership and just getting to know each other. But I think what both institutions represent is something unique and different. But I think that there's a learning curve and a lot of excitement in the air. And again, do you if someone wants to get in contact with you, Lindsay, how would they do that? And what is your turnaround time? Because a lot of people think, oh, that person's busy. I can't contact them. Because I know when I contact you, you get back to me immediately. What is your best way for people to contact you? And how open are you to people contacting you that want to know about esports or video games or game design?
Sure. So I generally suggest people first go to professorgrace.com just to get a sense for who I am. And some of the questions are often answered there, like where do I get your books, or how do I understand how to do this or that. The next is that I generally prefer people for professional contacts start with LinkedIn or Twitter, and then we move from there. You can always email me at lgrace@miami.edu, which is my faculty email. The challenge there is that on some days you might get 10 emails per hour, and it's really difficult to keep up with them. And in other days, it could be a trickle, and you just get me at the right time.
Yeah. And I tell people that all the time. They, well, I contacted you, but it may go to spam.
Yes.
That happens. And on LinkedIn, I have 50 billion followers. And so I get over 400 emails or plus a day. There's no way in the world I can go through them every day. So you just happen to might catch me. So I give people my personal email because on LinkedIn, it's going to be hard to catch me on there.
Yep.
But I
That's
really,
the pro tip.
yeah.
The pro tip is to actually, one of the things that blows my mind is how infrequently people in LinkedIn give you a sense for why they're contacting you. So those first couple of lines really matter. And when they say things like, hi, I was just like, whatever, it's like, no, get right to the point, because I may not click show more to learn what you really want to know.
Right. I tell people, and this is not only is a pet peeve of mine, but what I do is I try to educate people when I talk to them, the best way to keep in contact with me. I always tell young people, and even people that are seasoned or just people that are working in industry, when you meet people, they give you their business card, ask them, what is the best way to keep in touch with you? Because if you don't ask them that and you email them and they're not good emailers, then you're going to get upset. Maybe their best way to keep in contact is their cell phone, their bat line, who knows? But ask that person, because if you don't ask them, you're not going to know. And I always tell people, salutations matter. When you're emailing someone, it should be, I tell people to make it personal. I say, dear Professor Lindsay, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. My name is Dr. Marc Williams. I had the wonderful opportunity hearing you speak today on the podcast, and I'd love to learn more about what you do. Is there an opportunity for us to speak in the next 10 to 15 days? Give the person some latitude, give them some time. I'd love to talk to you soon. I look forward to speaking to you soon. Sincerely, and be done. Salutations matter. Be quick and to the point. Don't tell me your life story. Just make it just quick and to the point. Is that how it is for you as well? Would you like that way to be communicated to?
Absolutely. My time is precious. I'm always trying to do too many things in too little time. So efficient communication in any way is always appreciated.
Absolutely. So is there anything you want to share with the audience that you're doing, any projects that you have that you think that would be beneficial to them? Because again, there's so much that you do. And I know there's a lot that you do that I don't even know. But I'm curious to know if there are things that you would like to share with us that you're proud of working on right now, or things that you're looking forward to doing.
Sure. So there's a couple of them. So obviously one of my pride and joys right now is this forthcoming book on Black game makers. I really want people to submit content because I think it's really important to get a really wide view, a 360-degree view as well, a comprehensive view of the kind of work that's happening there. I'm also on an advisory board. The University of Miami is creating an initiative they're calling Global Black Studies, where we're trying to bring together a 360-degree view of the African diaspora worldwide. So it combines the university's connections in the Caribbean to the local African-American community, as well as the rest of the nation. And so I'm really proud to be doing that initiative. It's headed, essentially, it's championed rather by our president. And we've got people from all the different departments within the institution. I think that's another point of pride in my current projects. I have a lot of others. I'm always making some version of an indie game. I did some work with Miami Herald last year. I'll continue to do that kind of work going forward. I think one of the best ways to find out sort of what are the things I'm doing now is sometimes just to go check my website. I tend to share, all my social links are there. So I tend to share like hints of that work on social media, as well as, I'll drop it into some other spaces. So I think that's probably the best way to know what's going on that's interesting.
One thing I want to say is refreshing is that you take great pride in the culture of being a Black male and a Black man, and also the Black community. How important is it for Black people, as far as women, Black men, to give back and to educate about not only this industry, but other industries? Because a lot of times when many of us are successful, we tend to forget where we came from and our pathway. How important is it for people of color to provide pathways and provide knowledge that they've learned to other up and coming Black men and women that are trying to occupy those spaces?
I think it's essential as a person of color to make sure that we are offering a sense of what's on the other side, a sense as to a path, and providing that kind of mentoring. The challenge is, of course, that as often one of the only in your space, it's very easy to become burdened with the mentorship and not be afforded the time to do the work that you came there to do in the first place. This is particularly common within academia. So you can see time and time again, there are reports about females who are doing far too much mentoring or service work who aren't, they're just overburdened with it. And likewise for people of color, because you're the only one. And myself, for example, I'm serving on 5 faculty committees this semester, and that's exceeding a kind of average load, but they're all things that I think need to happen. 2 of them are related to diversity and equity and inclusion. I also think that as an alumnus of a number of these programs, what we should be doing is applying pressure to the industry to foster more growth and development in a structural way. So I'm an alumnus of the Leadership Education and Development Program, which is a summer program designed around minorities and increasing their access to understanding the jobs and opportunities in business. I'm an alumnus of the A Better Chance organization, which Oprah Winfrey substantially funded in the 80s and 90s, that really was about giving opportunities to minorities to get into better secondary education, to get into better high schools, whether it's private high schools or public programs that happen to be in great communities. I'm also an alumnus of the PhD program, which was explicitly about trying to get people in business, the PhD project rather. And so there are all of these structures that I think we need to actually substantiate in order to make this happen, because the one-on-one mentorship is not a scalable model. If you need to increase the 2% participation in the games industry by African Americans to 6% to get even near half of the number of percentage of consumers, you need something more than myself and Gordon Bellamy and a couple of the other sort of highly visible African Americans to say, oh, sure, I will go ahead and mentor the 400 to 500 people who are interested in doing what I do. We need structure.
Wow. Do you see yourself and Gordon and others creating something, creating a pathway or a organization that will provide that structure?
I would love to commit to that kind of resource. I've tried to do these things as part of the organizations I've added my leadership to. So being on the executive board for the Global Game Jam, we've moved some initiatives forward and actually globally done some really fascinating things in seeding games education in places where they weren't making games 5 years ago. I've also worked with Games for Change for these kinds of efforts. There are a bunch of organizations that are doing it. I personally don't know of one organization that is wholly focused on this one effort, but there are a lot of offshoots. In fact, I just shared with 2 students, with 2 student listservs, a variety of scholarships that have been produced largely in cooperation with both the IGDA, the International Game Developers Association, and the ESA, that are aimed at improving diversity within games. And these include, for the IGDA project, they're looking at $200,000 worth of grants and funding for scholarships and game projects. So there are those efforts. I don't know that I'm the person to lead another organization that starts that, but I think if someone gave me the resources and told me you have to teach one less class or you had some space, I'd certainly consider it.
Well, you have a new person here who's been connected to the video game industry over 21 years, but now in academia just a few years. But I'm here for support. There's also Keisha Walker, who is the head of the chairwoman and CEO of Black Collegiate Gaming Association, where she works with Black colleges and Black gamers, the gaming executives, on putting together, creating pathways for Black students around the country. But I'm definitely willing to do that because I know that there's a need for it. And again, I'm very encouraged. You and I had not spoken about this, but as we continue to talk, I'm very encouraged by that. And it's important that our white counterparts, our Asian counterparts, our Hispanic counterparts listen to this conversation because, in order for you to diversify or get diversity on your team or in your organization, you need to talk to the people that are leaders in the space in the academic side, but also people that are in the publishing side and the other parts of it that are of color, and listening to some of the needs and also some of the burdens that we have that our white counterparts don't have. And so we can all create some equity here where everybody wins. And again, we definitely got to have this another conversation. And again, it was a pleasure and a thrill to talk to you today. I'm glad I'm able to provide this kind of resource for our audience to know of or hear of a Lindsay Grace, who's the Knight Chair of Interactive Media at the University of Miami. Thank you so much for your knowledge, for your wisdom, and just for your consciousness and really paying attention to the needs of people of color in this space, but also being vigilant about making sure you're educating everyone on the planet. That's the most important thing. But it's important to also have representation that people can identify with people that look like them as well. So again, thank you again for coming out to Dr. Marc's Masterclass podcast. Again, shout out to Innovation Media Enterprises for all that you do. Aaron and Sia, AJ, thank you again for making us sound so great. Jacob, always so much love for you for giving me this wonderful platform. And remember, friends, I say this all the time, that there's three things that you can control. Okay. You cannot control anybody but yourself. And the three things are what you think, what you do, and what you say. Remember that you can control three things: what you think, what you do, what you say. Thank you again for another wonderful episode of Dr. Marc's Masterclass podcast. We will see you soon with another fresh episode. See you soon, my friends. Peace. Thanks for listening to Dr. Marc's Masterclass. I pray you enjoyed yourself today. I had a good time. I don't know about you, but this podcast is part of the Esports Future Wide Podcast Network and is produced by Innovation Media Enterprises. Please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and let us know how we're doing by leaving a comment or a review. Class dismissed.